Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yuri, thanks so much for inviting me to participate in this. I'm just really happy to be invited to do this, and thanks for allowing me to talk to your people.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I am very excited to hear more about you and what you're working on. So I'd like to start off by asking how you describe yourself and what it is that you do.
Funny you should ask me that. I think of myself as being an accidental artist because I came to myself as an artist. I discovered my creativity just as I was living my life. Mm-hmm. So it was an organic experience. And, oftentimes you hear people say, oh, well, I always drew my whole life and I was born with a crayon in my hand or, things like that. I can't remember a time when I wasn't drawing or making art. And my story is very different from that. I come from a very creative family, somewhat orthodox in some ways. Mm-hmm. And we were always making stuff. I think of my family as having been we were like a DIY family. Mm-hmm. But then like in the 50s and 60s, many people made do by making things themselves. It wasn't so unusual for that to happen in people's homes. And so, my family was no different. We made Christmas ornaments and Barbie doll clothes, candles. Most of our food was from scratch. And we made holiday cards, just like anything you can think of that you could make at home. We did that. Mm-hmm. So it was also a very big family that I come from too. It wasn't so much that we were an artsy family. We didn't draw and paint and things like that. We also weren't DIY in the sense that we weren't like knocking down walls and adding onto our house. Not that kind of stuff. Okay. But kind of sort of like everyday things or extra things is the way that I think about it. So I am an artist. People think of me oftentimes as being as a designer, but I don't really think of myself as being so much a designer, even though I realize in many ways I am. But I feel that my artwork it's autobiographical, mm-hmm. and it's also very evocative, and it's emotional, and it comes from deep within me. And it's not so much about mathematics and making sure things fit. So my artwork is also very layered. So even though there are some aspects of it that are design-like, I really think of myself as being an artist because most of my work comes from inside of me. Mm-hmm. So I'm an accidental artist.
Okay. So yeah, actually I wanted to talk about that because you mentioned yourself as an accidental artist and that you approached it a little bit later. Could you walk me through then some of what you did early on and maybe through your early undergrad days to your first couple of jobs?
Well, I was kind of aimless when I was younger and didn't have any ideas about what I wanted to do. And I started going to college when I was 16. So I actually have been to college twice. And when I was halfway through, I thought, God, what am I doing? I was like 18. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, not the faintest idea. So I thought that I was going to stop and I would go back again when I decided what it was that I wanted to do. So I kind of knocked around and rode horses and worked in restaurants and just kind of, like I said, didn't really have a plan to my life or anything like that. But the interesting thing is that I always felt like there was something indefinable that followed me around. It's kind of like always in the background, like behind me somehow. And I always tried to ignore it. It was like a presence of some sort. And I didn't know what it meant or what it was doing there. And so I always tried to, kind of say, leave me alone. What are you doing? Why are you here? And see, the interesting thing is that I realized eventually that that presence was my creative life that was waiting for me. And I didn't know that at the time. Like I said, I tried to get rid of it and make it go away. But it was saying to me that I needed to pay attention. But I didn't know what to pay attention to. I had no idea. But at the same time, I also always felt like there was something that I was supposed to do in life, but I didn't know what it was. Mm-hmm. So I think about it sometimes, ignore it other times. And so eventually all of these things came together, as I said, because I lived my life and everything kind of fell into place. So what happened was that I went to fashion design school and couldn't get a job. And then I finally got a job working in a store, and I started making jewelry to accessorize our mannequins. And so that's when I really began to make things aside from clothing. So I did that for a while, and then I started working with boxes. And then when I had my children, I began to make all of their invitations for their parties, because when I was a kid, we always did that. Mm-hmm. So naturally, I would do that as an adult. So at first they were very quiet invitations and smaller. And what happened was that they were like collage style. Okay. And the more that I went on with them, the bolder they became as art pieces, the larger they became. And they eventually turned into like 3- and 4-page pieces that I folded and taped together. And they were these elaborate designs. And so it's interesting because you can look at the progression of these collages, and it's all in there how I grew as an artist. So eventually what happened was this house was purchased, and I had to do something with it that was creative and very unlike anything anyone had ever seen before, but I didn't know what that would look like. I had no idea. I had the faintest idea. Mm-hmm. Like oftentimes brides-to-be know what their wedding dress should look like, but I never looked at a paint chip. I never looked at furniture. I never looked at fabric. I didn't have any kind of idea what I wanted. But I knew I wanted colorful, mm-hmm. and I knew that I wanted it to be a very special environment in which to raise my daughters. And my objective was to create a space that would support and nurture their interior creative souls. That was what I was doing. So I created this very special environment with my children in mind. And I wanted to be a place that could support them creatively. And so I thought about them, but I didn't think how this space would affect me living in it. I never thought about that before. But what's interesting now is that when my children were younger, I would say this is their childhood home. Mm-hmm. And now they're in their early 20s, and so now I say this was their childhood home. And I think of those as being very, very different statements. So what's happened is that I have creative children, mm-hmm. and I recognize that part of that is genetics. I mean, there's no question about that. But it's also, I believe, how I nurtured them and how they were nurtured by the space as well. So it's very interesting, this concept about making a creative space in which to raise children. And I feel that a lot of environments I see that are made for children, I don't see them as being for children. They're an adult's idea of what a space for kids should look like. Mm-hmm. And usually when I see these environments, I never feel that, I don't feel that people get it right very often. I see a lot of primary colors, and you'll see very little of that in my work. Very, very little. So without a plan to attract the press or to do nothing beyond being a mother and making a home, a nest for my children, mm-hmm. after a while, the press started to want to speak to me. So, of course, I had not much to say. I just was a mom with their kids, basically. Mm-hmm. So what happened was, it wasn't that people came to me and said, oh, I see what you did, let's have a conversation about it. They came to me and said, can you tell me what you did here? Mm-hmm. So I sat down and spent a lot of time over the years writing and writing and writing. What did I do? What does it mean? Why did I do it? Where did it come from? And just asking all these questions and writing and writing and writing and trying to get to the bottom of it. And then I started being asked to talk about my work. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm writing and writing and writing. And eventually I became very, comfortable talking about my artwork mm-hmm. from the repetition of doing it. And so I basically took the things I learned from my childhood, the idea of making something your own when you make it yourself, and I created an environment that is an environment in and of itself. So I didn't want it to be related to any other environment. I wanted it to be solely its own. And there are many things that I put in place in this space with that in mind. A lot of this stuff they're custom designs. I don't have furniture you could necessarily recognize as named designer furniture. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the fabrics are abstract fabrics or geometrics. They're not fabrics that have, pictures of animals and houses and children and things like that. Because I wanted people to be here. I didn't want them to be pulled out of the environment because they had their own connections to pieces that were inside the space. Mm-hmm. I wanted the environment to hold them within it. And so I always think that what we want as people is to have a never-ending conversation with another. And I feel that what I did with my home is I've created a never-ending conversation, but it's with a living environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see that. I spent some time looking at the many TV interviews that happened in your home, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I could definitely see that conversation happening because you can't help but have a conversation about each room and the different pieces within it because they are in effect statement pieces themselves. I'm curious, when you designed, let's say, pieces of furniture or elements, and you do put together types of fabric, how do you go out ahead of time and purchase the fabric or the various colors and bring them into the space and then make a decision from there? Did you already have a predetermined plan to go then search out for those particular patterns and colors?
Well, first of all, I was kind of a failure as a client with the different architects that were hired because I kept going on these shopping trips with the assistants, mm-hmm. and I came home without buying anything. And I'm thinking, I'm failing. But I didn't see anything that I wanted to purchase. Mm-hmm. But those experiences helped me to understand that I had to create my own individual things, that what I wanted didn't exist in the world.